Glen Mason returned again to EAH to present their recent restoration work on the Queen Emma Summer Palace. Glen has extensive experience in the restoration and adaptive reuse of historic structures, historic research, as well as authorship of many articles and a book about architectural history and preservation. Glen started by providing the history and background stories of one of the oldest homes in Hawaii at nearly 200 years, Queen Emma's Summer Palace. The original scope of work was replacing the existing wall finish in the Edinburgh Room with wallpaper, reconstructing shutters, relocating the front handrail, and strengthening the Pali Highway Wall. The project was funded through grants and aid from the legislature, which totaled $600,000. The good fortune on this project was that the bid for the restoration work was substantially below the grant amount, and Glen determined that strengthening the Pali Highway Wall was not necessary. These cost savings allowed paying for additional repairs due to termite damage, replacing additional shutters, repairing interior door frames, relocating a cloak case, new glass doors installed between a bedroom and the Edinburgh Room, and develop a maintenance plan. Glen's passion and expertise for architectural renovations of Hawaiian historical architecture is clear throughout his presentation.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Good morning, welcome, aloha. This is the March 21st meeting of Engineers and Architects of Hawaii. Barbara Rogers serving as president. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I believe we have a guest with us. I'd like you to introduce yourself.
My name is Patrick Knopf, and I met these good folks at the trade show about 6 or so months ago, and I've been meaning to come to one of the meetings. So, hello, everybody.
Oh, okay, great.
Thank you. So glad you could join us today. Now, do we have any particular announcements that we need to hear? Any announcements? Okay, no announcements. That will bring us to our comedy corner. Mac, do you have a joke for us?
This morning, I was searching the web for humor, and I came across a site for tuba jokes, T-U-B-A, tuba jokes. So here's the tuba joke for today that made me laugh. A tuba player says to his friend, "Did you hear my last recital?" And his friend says, "I hope so." I didn't hear any laughter, but.
There was a little bit. I heard it. Sam Gilley is our program chair for this month, and he's come up with a really great speaker for us today. So at this time, I would like to turn this program over to Sam to introduce our speaker.
Glen has been here before several times. I don't know actually how many times. I think we can go back in our records and probably find it out. And I was talking to him earlier, and I think the last time I remember him being here was when he was talking about the renovation of the old advertiser building that's over on Alapai Street.
Right.
And Kalakaua,
Yeah.
And I think it's been long enough. A lot of people probably don't even remember that is the it was the advertiser building.
Yep, it's the Hawaiian dredging building these days.
Yeah. So, but he has an extensive experience in renovation and adaptive use of historic structures, as the advertising building was an example, and historic research. And he's authored many articles in the book about architectural history and preservation. Some of these included in the national parks and federal properties of Hawaii, Guam, and Midway. He's the author of 9 historic structure reports, 4 in Hawaii, beginning with HSR for Guam sites. And I know he was talking earlier, he's working on Lahaina now as well. And he's hoping to get that under his belt, and then he claims he's going to retire, maybe. So, but his firm has received over 600 awards from the Historic Hawaii Foundation for work on historic buildings, and he has been responsible for the majority of these projects. I'm going to leave it there. Glen.
I don't know how many, I don't know how many people are familiar with Queen Emma Summer Palace, but it's at 2913 Pali Highway. It is actually one of the oldest houses in Hawaii. And it was built in 1848. It's a Greek Revival style house. And actually, it may be the only true Greek Revival style house that we have in Hawaii. I mean, it's a very odd building. There are no other buildings with sort of these monumental columns in the front like that one. Now, it has a pretty interesting history. There's actually a sketch of this building that shows Nu'uanu Valley at the time it was built, and at that time, Nu'uanu Valley was basically denuded. There were, I mean, it's hard to imagine now, but there were no trees. It was mostly grassland because the valley had been stripped of for firewood, for sandalwood, for all sorts of things, and there wasn't very much left. So from Queen Emma Summer Palace, what is now called Queen Emma Summer Palace, you had a full view of the water, which you would have a hard time doing today. It was originally built by a guy named H.A. Pierce, but he only owned it for, I don't know, maybe 8 years, 8 to 10 years. And it was bought by John Young II, who was the father of Queen Emma. So John Young II was half Hawaiian, so that would have made Queen Emma one quarter not Hawaiian, 3/4 Hawaiian. So she owned the property. It was essentially ceded to her by her father. So she owned the property from 1857 until she died in 1885. And the territory took it over, or at the time, it wasn't the territory. The monarchy bought the house from her estate in 1890. So then it is today a state property managed by state parks. So what initially started this restoration process was redoing the Edinburgh Room. The Edinburgh Room was built as an addition to the original house in 1863. So then the rest of this is history. The Daughters of Hawaii took over the property in 1915. It was pretty much a wreck by then. They did some repairs to it and then opened it as a museum in 1917, and it's been a museum ever since. So there have been several other additions, relatively small, all on the sort of back and Waikiki side, so that you don't see these additions from the primary viewing angles. But those are the caretaker, there's a toilet room, there were some offices. And then in the 1950s, Emalani Hale, which is that stone building that's to the left of it, was built. That's actually considered a historic site or a historic building itself. The project that we're going to talk about was actually funded in 2 separate GIAs, each for $300,000, and then the state parks combined the two. It took them about a year to combine these 2 GIAs, but it ended up becoming a $600,000 GIA. It says here that the core of the project was the restoration of the Edinburgh Room. That's not exactly true, in that the justification for the original GIA was the restoration of the Edinburgh Room and strengthening the wall that faces the Pali Highway. which was going to be a very expensive thing to do. But there was for good reason, there was some suspicion that that wall was weak and the siding was starting to come away from the wall. So there were two bids that were received, and one of them was substantially under the $600,000 number. The other one was right at the $600,000 number. And the company that won, that was the low bidder, was Constructors Hawaii, which I've worked with several times, and they are very good working with historic buildings. So in essence, this was a very unique project because we had money. We had more money than we knew what to do with, which is kind of unusual. The original scope was these 4 items, okay? Really restoring the Edinburgh Room, and I'll explain a little bit more about that when we get there. Strengthening the Ewa Wall, which is the one facing Pali Highway, and then moving the handrail and stairs, and I'll explain that when we get there. And then the Malka windows were, the ones that open into the Edinburgh Room were in really bad shape and needed, the shutters, literally by the time we started the work, the shutters on one of those had fallen off, had just fallen apart. So that was the original scope of work. But we ended up doing lots of extra work for this $600,000. And I make a list of it here. We actually made some additional shutters. The original house was designed, actually there were no windows, there were doors. And the doors opened directly to the outside, and there were shutters on all of those doors. We were able to rebuild several of the shutters that needed rebuilding. We painted all of the shutters. We were able to do, we built a new glass and wood door, a set of doors. They had some minor roofing work that we needed to do. There was a leak into the caretaker's house. And anything that came up that was unforeseen, like we would discover termite damage or something like that, we were able to pay for it because we had the money. I've probably had 3 projects in my entire career where we had the money to do kind of whatever we wanted to do. And then at the very end of the construction project, there was enough money left to pay for us doing a maintenance plan for the site. The first thing that we did, even before we started the construction work, is I had the contractor come in and cut a hole in the wall inside the building to check out the condition of the Ewa Wall, because that was a big part of the project. And what we found was that all the studs were in good shape, all of the siding was connected, and so we basically eliminated one of the things that was going to be one of the more expensive parts of the project by doing this. That then was later plastered, the metal lath was installed and plaster was in the, you can't even tell that anything was done to the building. This is the Edinburgh Room before the work was done. One of the things that happened after the daughters took over the responsibility for the building was the room had originally been wallpapered. The wallpaper failed. And so they covered the walls with 1x12s with battens, and which changed the look. But then subsequently the battens were taken off and 1/4 inch hardboard was put over the 3/4 inch 1x12s. And what that ended up with was that what happened in the room was not only was it not wallpapered, but all the wall surfaces were actually even with the window casings and the door casings, so that it looked, and in order to hide that, they literally covered the seam with that little nailing strip you see on the side. So it really distorted the feeling of the way the room was originally. So one of the advantages that we had here is that one of the windows was so bad that the Daughters of Hawaii brought somebody in to actually do some work on that window. And this is a view of the window of the work in progress. But one of the things that it revealed was that was basically how bad the termite damage was in all of the wood that had been put over the studs to act as the backing for the wallpaper. So we knew that going in, we knew that it was going to be bad, which was actually, quite revealing. Ultimately, this window was refinished and everything looked fine, but all that rotted wood all that termite damaged wood was still in the walls. The first order of business was to strip everything out of the Edinburgh Room. And one of the really cool things, well, for me it was cool, is that when you take the 1x12 boards off, you literally can see the exterior of the original 1848 house. I mean, that's a detail that shows how the boards ran into one of the door openings, and actually those little dark spots there are where the muslin was tacked to the siding. In other words, they had stretched the way traditional wallpaper is installed is you basically install muslin, tack it in place, and then you glue the wallpaper to the muslin. And so you could have, I mean, at the Walker Estate, there was a hole 12 inches high by 2 feet long. You didn't even know it was there until you took the wallpaper off, because you can basically skim over almost anything almost any blemish. And that's what they had done with the older wall of the 1848 house. Now, the other thing that was kind of interesting is that when you take the skin off of the inside of these buildings, you can basically see the history of changes to the building. So that was an original window or opening that was filled in. We never even, you can't tell that from the outside, but from the inside, we could tell what had been there before. I only included this picture because there's this little strip, there are a couple of very small areas where for some reason that those boards were not termite eaten. And we saved those. Those are in the wall. You can't see them now, but they're in the wall. And so I just showed that to show that we saved what little we could that was on the walls. Most of it was pretty badly termite damaged, though. One of the things that was an advantage of doing something like this is that if there were any termite-eaten studs, we were able to fix them and re-strengthen them. And so the trick there, though, is that you can replace the termite-eaten stud, but you have to refasten it to the siding. And so what we did in those cases is that we actually used a sheet metal L angle that tied to the stud and then tied to the siding. So we could tighten the siding against the stud, but not by nailing from the outside, by pulling it in from the inside. And so that had to be done in, I think, 3 or 4 locations. The corner of the Edinburgh Room, it was the Mauka Waikiki corner of the Edinburgh Room. That stud at that corner was completely gone, so we had to replace that. But otherwise, most of the studs were in pretty good shape. There is nobody in Hawaii who knows how to do traditional wallpaper anymore. They've all retired or passed away or whatever. So we had to bring somebody in from California to do this. We'd worked with this individual before, and this is the room when they were still working on it, but getting near the end. That smaller picture on the right is in pretty much the same location as that detail photo showing the siding coming into the door opening, okay? And it shows you how after you're done, you can't see any of the blemishes. They're all covered with this muslin and wallpaper. But it took them about 2 weeks, but they came out and, you know, did the entire project. I will say that I was extremely worried that we were going to find some of the original wallpaper when we took all of the siding off. And fortunately, we did not. There were some shreds of muslin left, but no wallpaper. And the reason I'm saying I'm relieved is because we selected, working with the Daughters of Hawaii, we selected a period wallpaper that we knew was made in the 1860s, but we really were able to choose something we liked from that time period. And we had to order the wallpaper before the work started. And so if we had discovered anything under the surface, I'm not sure what we would have done. We might have had to reorder. I don't know. This is one shot of the finished room. They kind of redid some of their furnishings and whatnot. There's a couple things to explain about this. This is also a shot taken after the wallpaper was all done. But other things were done to this room. The cape case used to be installed in a former door opening. The Daughters of Hawaii wanted to reinterpret that room as a bedroom, which it was originally. And so we fabricated doors to match the other exterior doors in the palace, and including the hardware, and installed them in what had been just an empty opening. And to do that, we had to move the cape case over. It took a few modifications, but it wasn't that hard to do. So that was one of the changes that occurred in this room as a result. The daughters were very attached to the carpet, so we had to save the carpet. And this is just a weird thing, but when you take the 1x12s off, the room basically gets at 3 inches, well, 1.5 inches bigger in both directions, right? Because the walls essentially move back. Fortunately, the carpet was just able to be restretched so that it fit that size, because it had to get 1.5 inches bigger in both directions, which it managed to do, thank goodness, because that carpet is probably a $15,000 or $20,000 carpet. This just shows, actually the one window with the copper flashing over the top, that's the one that was redone. That's also the one that by the time we actually started the job, those shutters were gone, and they were gone because they'd fallen apart. All of those 4 windows on that side, the shutters were all redone, and 3 of the windows were completely redone on the inside. Still the original sash, still the original jambs, but there was a lot of work dealing with rot damage, because this is the side that gets all the heavy weather. This is facing Mauka. This is another example of a kind of an unforeseen. The picture on the left shows what used to be the situation. And one of the reasons why the railing was listed as something that needed to be taken care of is that, as you can imagine, not every time, but many times when people would like back up their cars or whatever, they hit the railing that went out into the asphalt paving. And it needed to do that for handicapped accessibility reasons. So we decided we would take the same railing and just basically move it in. Okay, that was part of the design. Now, I suspected that the paving area between the 2 stairs was coral block. And so on our drawings, we required that they do a test excavation there to see, to hopefully find the coral block. There wasn't any. And the picture, the sort of upper right shows there was nothing there. Then they started to take, jackhammer out the steps because we needed to move them in. And they discovered that those steps were actually plastered over coral block. Now, if Holly McEldowney from the state parks had not been on site when they were doing that, they would have just blasted them out. But she stopped them as soon as she saw they were coral block, and we salvaged all of these coral blocks that had been the steps. Now, my suspicion is that all of the steps, including the main ones going up, they're all coral block that have been cemented over, okay? Now, big debate. What do we do with these? This is original material. It almost certainly was this condition at the time that Queen Emma owned the house. And so the daughters decided to reinstall the coral as it was. Okay, now, it's very sort of reddish looking there because that's the bottom side. What you're seeing there is what was sitting on the dirt. We flipped them all over so that because those were in better condition, we flipped all of the stones over so that the bottoms became the top. And then when these guys reinstalled it, they very carefully tinted all the mortar to match the sort of red tint to these stones. And then the stones turned white, just in the rain. It just washed them out. And so now the joints are like a little bit darker than the stones. Actually, this is pretty much the current condition. You can see how they got a lot lighter. And actually, this close-up one was really designed to really show that there's a disadvantage to these things. They're uneven. You know, when you're thinking about a tread, there's a sacrifice here. The sacrifice is that you're going to give people a little bit more of an uneven surface to walk on, but you're also, you know, communicating that message of, hey, coral was used here for steps. The one on the right you can barely see it in this photo, but there's some plant growth growing out of the coral now, which I thought was kind of appropriate.
I'm curious how coral was bonded.
Well, I mean, look, coral was used as a primary building material in Hawaii until, well, the oldest building, well, actually, the youngest building I know was built in 1865 of coral block. And coral block, I mean, Honolulu there was a big coral reef off of Honolulu. And they could very easily mine coral because it's relatively soft. It's not like, you know, trying to quarry basalt stone. And so it was a very convenient Western building material. And they would do that by just cutting, literally you can cut coral, but I mean, it's not like basalt. I mean, it is a relatively soft material, right? And the way they would mortar all of these things together is they basically burned coral to make lime. And then they would use they mix the lime together to make the mortar. I mean, that's what Kauai Hau Church was built of. But, you know, they pretty much stopped using this material. Well, I know probably 1866 is the last coral building I know that was constructed. I mean, the Royal Mausoleum, the chapel is a coral block building, and it was built in 1865, I think. So, you know, it was just a convenient building material, and we didn't have quarries until the 1880s. I mean, that quarried basalt. This is just to illustrate, there were all sorts of other problems that the palace had that we were able to deal with, some of which we knew about in advance and some of which we didn't. The one of the characteristics of cedar roofing is that it has a tannic acid in it. Tannic acid and copper don't like each other. And so actually, yes, that was an example of what happened with the tannic acid running off the roof into the copper gutters. It basically could eat away the copper gutters. And so one of the things that we did was line all of the gutters to prevent this from happening. The picture on the right is a picture, we actually had to open up the beam area over the main entry because there was clearly some termite damage there. It turned out it wasn't the beam, but it was the fascia that was covering the beam that had to be replaced. But these are all things that were kind of discovered as we went along. We knew from an earlier job that the doors on the interior were original doors, but that they had been patched with spackle where there had been termite damage. And then they were painted and they kind of looked okay. So one of the jobs was to repair the doors using wood, not spackle, to take care of any of the damage that had been there. But in doing this, we also discovered that the jamb of one of the doors, anyway, was completely shot. And this is the photo in the middle is a photo looking at the wall with the jamb gone. So what you're looking at actually is 2 layers of plaster with wood lath and nothing between them in this picture. This is a picture actually of that same opening after the door was restored and the jambs were restored and rebuilt, okay? And again, we did this using materials that we think were appropriate. You have to remember that this building, we use Douglas fir for a lot of our work. This building, the use of Douglas fir and redwood in Hawaii did not start until the early 1850s because those are California products. This building was built before then, and so we believe that all of the building material here are Eastern products that were shipped around the Horn. So they would have been Eastern spruce or one of those materials. It wouldn't be starting about 1855, almost everything in Hawaii was made out of Douglas fir. I mean, Iolani Palace is almost solid. All the wood in it is Douglas fir, that is, except for the doors. So I think that Douglas fir became a ubiquitous building material, but in this house, almost all the woodwork had to have been Eastern spruce or hemlock, something like that. That's it. I don't know if anybody's got any questions, but
did you look into what they would have done originally for termite protection?
Termite protection?
Yeah.
Well, the building, the daughters have a baiting system installed around the building, and they have had it tented. So the termite damage that we found was all old damage. If we had found any live termites, it would have been a totally different ballgame. One of the things, I talked about studs. There were a couple of places in the Edinburgh Room where we discovered that the plate that the studs sat on was very soft and had been eaten by the termites. But we were able to replace most of those because most of that occurred under the windows. And because we were working on the windows, we were getting in there and we were able to get under that. We didn't have to jack up studs or do anything like that. The building is a very strange building in other respects. It has, the original building had a hipped roof that, of course, part of that roof sloped Malka. And then they built the Edinburgh Room like that so that one roof basically sloped into another. Well, I mean, I've been on that roof and it's actually really watertight. It's been well done. But I don't know how they handled such a thing in 1863, because you had two wood shingle roofs coming together in this really long, like 60-foot valley. Yeah, no peel and stick in those days. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how they probably use some sort of sheet metal or something like that, but it's still pretty interesting to see how these things get put together. Sometimes we think, oh boy, in the olden days, they really knew how to do stuff. Well, I've seen some proofs where that's not the case. So, you know, but actually today they're in pretty good shape.
The original construction, they did just use untreated wood and.
Oh, yeah. There's no treated wood in that building at all. And actually the floor, it's surprisingly, it hasn't had, the floor is not damaged at all. The floor is 1x12 boards that are basically, they're not even TNG. I mean, there are places in the basement where you can look up and see the daylight. I did work many years ago on the little central hallway. You know, there's the main hall and then the central hall. And I remember when we did work there, we discovered termite damaged studs in that room. I mean, none of those studs were on an exterior wall, so we could just replace the studs, but without having to tie stuff back in. But there had been termite damage, but this building is, you know, approaching 200 years old, and you know, and it's all untreated wood, but it's managed to, it's got, I can tell you that, for example, the frame house, which is considered to be the oldest building, oldest Western style building in Hawaii, those studs are all creosote treated, because that house was virtually rebuilt in 1930. This particular building is actually really surprisingly original material. I've done paint tests on, you know, just examining layers of paint, and you can literally tell, because there are more layers of paint on the front part of the house than on the Edinburgh Room. I mean, but there's still like, I don't know, 10 layers of paint. I mean, it's been painted and taken care of for a very, very long time. So.
Do you know if they ever tented the house?
Oh, I'm sure. Yes, they did. They tented the house. I mean, that's why there hasn't been, since they tented and they used the baiting system, there hasn't been any infestation at all. So yeah, it's pretty, even though the floor joists, they're all original. I mean, they've strengthened them with additional things occasionally, but all of the floor joists are there. I mean, they're all rough sawn, you know, 3x6s or something. So,
Question, what was your maintenance plan? You mentioned that you also had a maintenance plan.
the maintenance plan, you know, I wrote the maintenance plan. I mean, my feeling about maintenance plans is, well, the way I treat them as checklists in the end. That's what because I don't want to tell somebody, well, you should use this material to clean this. To me, that's a waste of time. I mean, I think it's not necessarily a waste of time, but the people who are doing the cleaning, they're not going to read the maintenance manual. So I know at the Royal Mausoleum, for example, I wrote essentially a checklist, okay? And once a year, I usually go through, and sometimes with somebody from Kamehameha schools or, you know, somebody else, and the checklist is to force you to look at everything, because the biggest problem with most of these buildings, any building really, is that you stop looking. Well, you don't look at the roof. You're not forced to look at the roof. You're not forced to look at the gutters. And the purpose of a checklist is to make you look. And sometimes you should do it more often than once a year. But what I found with a lot of these buildings, I mean, sometimes I'll go into a building and I'll say, well, why don't you take care of that? Really? They never even saw it. They never even thought of it, right? Because they never looked. They got used to it being the way it was. And so I think having somebody go through and just be forced to look. So I'm a little bit more along that line of thinking. I've seen maintenance plans that tell you about, oh, you should clean with this material as opposed to that material. I don't know. The maintenance people never look at that stuff. So I don't have a whole lot of faith in it. I do think it's good to point out that you shouldn't do certain things. And that's part of a maintenance plan. But in the end, the really valuable thing is in my mind, is the checklist. Because otherwise people don't look.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem.
I wanted to say, when Sam was singing your praises, sir, those of us out in the empire, edges of the empire, was kind of muffled. I wanted to add that how privileged we are that you are here talking to us, and then say a decade from now, people will be talking about Hartwood, Dickey, and Mason. Thank you very much, sir.
That'll be a stretch, but okay.
All right, shall we give them a round of applause?
All right.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Yeah.
We've
I'm
got a
happy to.
certificate here we have to present to you as well.
On three. I think I got it. Right.
All right, thank you.
All right, at this time, I'd like to thank you again, Glenn, for being with us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Sam. And if anyone ever would like to suggest any particular topics for the future, please let us know. We would appreciate that. Okay, at this time, our meeting is officially adjourned.
All right, thank you.
Engineers and architects of Hawaii welcome your comment on this program and any of our recent programs. We encourage your direct participation in this community outreach. So please email us your comments and ideas at eahawaii@gmail.com.